Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Wohl, and I work at the National Weather Service office up in Tallahassee, Florida, in the building you see pictured here at the Florida State campus. We occupy the 4th floor there. I've been working in that office for 23 years, and today I'm coming to you via the stemCONNECT folks to talk about hurricane preparedness. We're right in the middle of hurricane season, plenty of season left. So specifically, what I'm going to talk about today is we'll start out with some hurricane season basics, and then we'll get into some definitions, and we'll talk about how to get the forecasts and warnings, and finally, specific ways that things you can do to stay prepared and safe if a hurricane threatens. So first, the basics. Well, the blue line represents where we are right now in the season, and the red and yellow areas show the total numbers of hurricanes and tropical storms that have occurred from the years 1944 through 2020. So as you can see, in the early months of the season officially begins June 1st and ends on the 30th of November. You know, there's usually not too much activity early in the season, but we usually see a lot of activity ramping up in August. That was not the case this year. This year, we had no tropical systems named in the Atlantic Basin the entire month of August. The last time that happened was 1997. So we're a little behind the curve now. But typically, we're approaching the peak of activity in the season, which occurs on September 10th. And then it stays pretty active into October, but you see a declining trend as we move through the last half of the season. So typically, we consider the peak of the season to be the months of August, September, and October. Roughly 80% of named storms occur during those 3 months, and 92% of the major hurricanes. So these maps show you kind of the favorite areas for development as we move through the 6 months of hurricane season. So you've got June there in the upper left, where one of the more likely areas to see activity is the eastern Gulf of Mexico, so right here near Florida. And then not much activity in July typically. And then typically August, we see a lot of activity. That's didn't this year. In September, you see in the upper right is the busiest month. And as you'll see, there is a lot going on out there, just nothing near the United States. In September, you could get systems coming right off of Africa and developing and moving across the entire ocean and affecting North America. So in October, we typically lose those African systems, but still get development closer into the continent and the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. And then November, things really drop off. This chart shows all of the individual points of origin of all of the tropical storms, hurricanes, and what have you that developed from 1851 to 2015. So that's a long period of record. And you can see storms, some of them are developing right on the coast of Africa, all sorts of points across the tropical Atlantic and through the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico and off the southeast US coast. So like I said, that we're in an active period, climatologically speaking. Let's talk about some definitions now. All right, so when you have an area of low pressure, fully developed, closed counterclockwise circulation, but winds haven't really gotten too strong in it yet, say 38 miles an hour or less, then the National Hurricane Center can identify it as a tropical depression, and it'll be given a number. So the first tropical depression of the season is Tropical Depression 1, the second one is 2, and so on. Once sustained winds get to 39 miles an hour or greater, it'll get a name. Okay, and we have a name list we'll look at here shortly. The winds have to get up to 74 miles an hour sustained for it to become a hurricane. And then a major hurricane, which is, and you can see that with the hurricanes are divided up into categories from 1 through 5. So major hurricanes are category 3 and higher. So category 1 is 74 to 95 miles an hour. Hurricane Hermine in Tallahassee was a category 1 back in 2016. Hurricane Michael in 2018 in the Panhandle was a category 5. Winds were 160 miles an hour. That was a very devastating hurricane up here in the Panhandle. All right, what about watches and warnings? When we're dealing with tropical systems, tropical storms, or hurricanes, the watches will come out 48 hours ahead of the expected onset of tropical storm force winds. The warnings come out 36 hours ahead. And we peg it to the onset of tropical storm force winds because when winds get to that level, roughly 40 miles an hour, it starts to become too dangerous for folks to be out and about, driving around and shopping and boarding up their homes and evacuating and things like that because, well, first of all, first responders stop responding. The police stop coming out at 40 miles an hour. Fire and ambulances stop responding at 45 miles an hour. And they close bridges and overpasses. So if you're trying to evacuate from the coast, those routes will no longer be available once those winds set in. So you really want to make sure that you are, done, before the warning period comes. So you either are fully evacuated by then or ready to hunker down in your house. Storm surge watches and warnings. Not all of you will be living in storm surge zones, but that's storm surges, where the ocean water rushes into areas of normally dry land, and we forecast that in terms of feet of inundation or how deep the water is right where you are. So the watches will be issued 48 hours ahead of the possibility, of life-threatening inundation. The warnings are issued 36 hours ahead. Now, typically, most mandatory evacuations are issued based on storm surge. So you need to know, you and your family need to know, are you in a storm surge evacuation zone? And if you are, then you need to have a plan and heed evacuation warnings. You don't want to be caught in a storm surge. It could be a deadly situation. All right, let's take a look at the name list for this year. Here's the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season name list. And we use 6 lists that we rotate through every 6 years. So some of these names may look familiar to you. For me, it looks familiar to me. That was a hurricane for us here in Tallahassee in 2016, and it's on the list again. So there are typically 21. There are 21 names on the list. We don't use all the letters because it's hard to find names for some of them. But Alex, Bonnie, and Colin, they all occurred early in the season, from July 4th and prior. Danielle and Earl are out there now. We'll talk a little bit more about them. And then the next name on the list is Fiona. Now, we're really behind the curve, but this time last year we were on the L storm. So we're definitely moving at a slower pace than the last few seasons. And that's good news, right? So how do you get the hurricane forecasts and warnings? Well, we have a webpage. You can just go to weather.gov and click on our part of the part of the country. I know you don't live here in Tallahassee. You live in other parts of Florida. Just go to weather.gov and click on your part of the state that you live, and you'll get your local webpage. And all the web pages have this little forecast pull-down menu. You want to click that and select tropical, and you'll get our tropical web page, which looks like this. There's a screenshot here. This is really a great one-stop shop, and it doesn't matter where you live in Florida or if you're traveling to other hurricane parts of the country. All of the Weather Service offices have pages that look like this, navigate like this, and have the same types of content. So the first page will be this one, the Tropical Weather Outlook. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, the next page or two. And then there are active storms out there. These other tabs about active storms and threats and impacts will appear and give you more details about what exactly you can expect or should be planning for in your neighborhood. So this is an example of an active storm tab, which kind of has the cone of uncertainty, where could the center of the storm go? How big is it? What is the extent and size of the area of tropical storm force winds and hurricane force winds? Where are the warnings? So there's a lot of information on that first graphic. Then down below it, you have some wind speed probabilities. What's the likelihood of getting tropical storm force winds and so on. And as scrolling down the page, you get flooding rain information and information about tornado threats as well. So this is, I just pulled this off the internet before talking today. This is our current tropical weather outlook. And, I recommend you check this thing out once a day. It's updated 4 times a day at 2 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Just so you don't get caught by surprise. And what we have out there is we've got 2 hurricanes, Hurricane Danielle and Hurricane Earl there. Earl is going to pass by Bermuda. There's tropical storm warnings out there now, and it's going to be a major hurricane. It's predicted to be at that point. If it does reach that strength, it'll be the first major hurricane of the season. Danielle's going to weaken and kind of loop-de-loop around in the North Atlantic there, and then eventually lose its tropical characteristics and head on towards Europe. And then those 2 areas of hatched area there, the orange and the yellow, those are areas where there isn't a system yet. It hasn't been fully developed into a low pressure system, but there's the potential to develop anywhere in that hatched area. So And the color codes are the key is right below the graphic there. So low chances of development are in yellow, medium chances are in orange, and high chances in red. So we've got a slightly better chance of that system there, labeled number 1 on the image on the left, of developing somewhere in that orange hatched area in the image on the right. Then there's another little kind of cluster of thunderstorms moving off of Africa, and that has a somewhat lower chance of development once it gets out past the Cape Verde Islands there. So we've certainly seen since the beginning of September a big uptick in activity in the Atlantic, but so far, and I'm knocking on wood here, we have had nothing in the United States of any consequence. So how do you get, in addition to the web page, social media? I know a lot of you are probably on social media a lot. We have an active account on Facebook and Twitter. We also have a YouTube account that I recommend you check out, because we've got lots of short little preparedness videos and useful information on how to be prepared, not only from hurricanes, but all other types of weather. So we typically put together a one-pager like this one. This is one we put together last year for Tropical Storm Fred that came up into the Panhandle in August. And, you know, it's got all sorts of information then. The potential track area there, the cone of uncertainty, we call it, the extent of warnings along the coast, and then other useful information there and the key points. So these will be coming out routinely if all the offices do this, if you are under threat of a tropical system. But while we're talking about social media, I want to warn you guys that there's a lot of fake news in weather, just like there's fake news in news. For reasons that I don't fully understand, some folks like to create fake graphics, and sometimes they'll even steal our logo. You see the NOAA logo in the upper right image there. I'm going to tell you that's cone of uncertainty there. Well, no, we'd never issue something that long, that far out. So that's fake. So just be careful. If something looks fishy to you, it probably is. So just verify what you're seeing is true before sharing it. Please do not share false information. It complicates our job of trying to get folks to pay attention to what was really expected. So you go to weather.gov, you go to hurricanes.gov. Those are your sources. So how do you stay safe in hurricanes and the types of weather associated with hurricanes? Well, one way is to have a way to get the warnings. Right? If we put a warning out and you don't hear it or aren't aware of it, then our mission has failed a little bit there, right? So we need you to at least hear the warnings before you can, so you can act, to take evasive action to get out of harm's way. One way to do that is to buy a NOAA weather radio. Some of you may already have one. I have one in the house. This radio broadcasts nothing but forecasts and warnings from the National Weather Service, and the warnings will trigger an audio alert that's loud and will wake you up. That's why I've got mine in the house. I want to be woken up if there's a tornado warning issued in the middle of the night from my neighborhood. I don't want to sleep through it, wind up, tossed into the yard someplace, right? So I recommend that. Of course, you can get information if your area is under a tropical threat. It'll be all over your local news, right? The Weather Channel 2. So local TV and radio. Some high-end warnings get pushed right to your phone, and I know, so all your smartphones, unless you disable this feature, you're going to get those warnings. So tornado warnings, hurricane warnings, and the like. Some communities have outdoor sirens, not all. The internet, of course, like I've already described to you, and then word of mouth. So just talk it out. It's really hard to be surprised by a hurricane these days with all these ways to communicate. All right, so part of one thing that you have in hurricanes is lightning, especially in some of the outer bands of hurricanes. Lightning is dangerous anytime, whether it's associated with a hurricane or not. And if you hear thunder, that means lightning is nearby and you need to get inside. So if you're out on the playing field, soccer, or whatever your game is, and the coaches and teachers will probably be all over this, you want to get back inside and stay inside until at least 30 minutes has passed after the last thunder. If you can't get to a sturdy building like your home or your school, a car is safe if you're inside the car with the windows up. You're safe from lightning in there. You don't want to be cowering under a tree, because you can see in the image there, trees are tall, relatively tall compared to things around them, and they can attract lightning. Lightning will seek out the tallest objects. Flooding. Do not ride your bike or any other type of vehicle into a flooded road. All right, don't let your mom and dad drive the car in the water either. So remember, we have the slogan, turn around, don't drown. If it means you're late, be late, okay, rather than potentially drown. Because it doesn't take a whole lot of water to cause problems. I mean, 6 inches of fast-moving water can knock an adult off their feet. All right, 12 inches of fast-moving water can float a small car. And 1.5 to 2 feet of fast-moving water will carry your SUV away with you in it. And that is not a good situation. So you may have to be rescued. And so it's just better to turn around and don't drown. Sometimes it might be tempting to get out there and you know, fool around in the flood water, you know, get your boat or your whatever, your jet ski and play in the water. You really don't want to do that because flood waters have all sorts of hazards in them. They could be down power lines that are still live and get you electrocuted. All sorts of debris will be in there, so you could injure yourself that way. There will be chemicals in this water, sewage. You know, who wants to be playing around in sewage water? And then insects and other animals that could like that snake pictured there. So don't get in there. Don't let your pets get into the flood water either. But if there's a tornado warning, and like I said, sometimes hurricanes produce tornadoes in their outer bands there. You want to be obviously get in your house if you can. Get down to the lowest floor possible. Cover up your head somehow, pillow, helmet, what have you. You want to be away from windows. So we can look at this another way. You don't want to be in the upper floors of your house. You want to be down low as possible, certainly an interior room, preferably without any windows. Okay. Now, Hurricane Preparedness Week. We have it every year, the first week of May. And you know, you can click to this webpage is there year-round though, and you can click on that link there, or just do a search, or go to hurricanes.gov and search for preparedness. And there's a lot of great advice in here for you and your family to use to prepare and be prepared ahead of time. First, you have to determine your own risk. Do you live in a home that's sturdy enough to withstand hurricane force winds? Well, if you live in a mobile home, a manufactured home, then no. The answer is no. That's not a safe place to be. And you want to be able to plan ahead of time. Where are you going to go? You have friends and family that are outside the threat zone that you can travel to and stay with. Work all that out ahead of time. What about, are you going to have to go to a storm shelter? Local governments will open shelters in area schools typically. But, you know, this is not comfortable living by any stretch. So, you know, you're going to be crammed in there in close quarters. You're going to have a cot, not much else. So it's not comfortable, but they're available as an option of last resort. First, do you need to evacuate? Do you live in a storm surge zone? If so, you need to have an evacuation plan. You need to know where you're going to go because, you know, we storm surge, those floodwaters surging in from the ocean are deadly. So you definitely want to do that. So develop and evacuate, know where you're going to go or what routes you're going to take and have alternate routes available. The disaster supply kit. All right, you can get information all over the internet, just to Google search this, but you can also come to this webpage to see what you should put in your kit. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Insurance. You have your folks run through their insurance. Do they have the proper insurance that will cover damage from hurricanes or flooding? And that's a separate set of insurance for flooding, by the way. Make sure you get the home strengthened, the hurricane straps for the roof, if they're not already there. Are you going to board up the windows? Leave time for that. What about you? If you have an elderly neighbor, check on them, make sure they're okay. Get all this written down so everybody's on the same page. All right, so what goes in your kit? Well, some of this should be obvious, but you obviously need to have, you need to plan for the power to be out for a while. Maybe as much as a week or even longer. A week without power, you're going to be uncomfortable unless you have a generator running the air conditioning. So you're also not going to be able to use the microwave, and if you have a gas stove, you can use that, but you need to have some non-perishable foods, whether it's canned food or other non-perishable foods that won't spoil, that you can stock away in your kit and bust out when it's time, when the power's gone out. Water, very important. We recommend a gallon of water per person and per pet per day. That's a lot of water. So this is something you definitely want to do ahead of time and have there stocked up and ready to go. First aid kit, like I said, at 45 miles an hour, the ambulance isn't going to come. There's not going to be any first responders. So You know, you need to be able to be self-sufficient, take care of yourself. If you take prescription medication, or your parents do, if there's an emergency declared, a local emergency declared, you can go to the pharmacy and get a 30-day supply of your prescriptions without getting the prescription refilled. All right, but only if there's an emergency declaration. That's something I just learned recently, so you might want to share that with your folks. Have ways to stay clean. You know, you might not be able to run water if you're living in a well system, so have some hygiene items. Battery operated radio, super important, so lots of spare batteries should be on hand. You need that radio to get information, to find out where to go to get ice, things like that, you know, and various areas of relief that are happening in the community. Flashlights, of course, are a no-brainer. Maybe some extra clothing in case you do have to evacuate and it's already there in your kit. You can just grab and go. And money. Have some cash stashed in there too, because you know maybe the ATM systems will be down, or the credit card systems. And there's a lot more that aren't on this. So you know, go to that list and have a checklist and get that stuff prepared ahead of time, because you don't want to be running out to the store at the last minute with everybody else just to find the shelves empty, and then you don't have critical stuff you need for your kit. And with that, I will wrap it up. I hope you found this information useful. And if anybody has any questions, I can take them now.
Awesome. We don't have any questions, but if we receive any through the recording, you should be able to submit those still on the sidebar. If you would like to send those questions in, we can get you answers and send them back later. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining and watching the session. And thank you, Mark, so much for your time and for sharing this information. It's extremely important, especially in the middle of hurricane season, but as we continue to live through these storms, it'll be important even in the future. So thank you so much for your time today and your expertise.
All right, you're very welcome.